This year marks the 46th anniversary of the diplomatic ties between China and Japan. For Chinese people, the year 2017 also marks the 80th anniversary of the Lugo Bridge incident. But for Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, this year could herald his renewed political life after he called for a snap election. How will this domestic reshuffle impact China-Japan relations? Take a look at this first before we go to our panel.
Japan and China on Thursday held a reception in Tokyo ahead of the 45th anniversary of diplomatic ties. Abe became the first Japanese premier in 15 years to attend the event and met Chinese ambassador to Japan, Cheng Yonghua.
Although we have various problems between China and Japan, we will try to deal with these issues without them affecting our relationship. We'd like to deal with these issues and deepen our cooperation in various fields.
While Japan and China economic ties have shined, Abe and previous prime ministers have skipped the anniversary events in the past due to territorial and historical disputes.
The 45th anniversary of the normalization of China-Japan diplomatic relations is an important juncture. We hope that the Japanese side can make concerted efforts with China to take this opportunity to abide by the 4 political documents and 4-point principled consensus.
The event coincides with the dissolution of the lower house of the parliament. The snap election called by Shinzo Abe was considered as calculating as an effort to maintain power and start constitutional amendments as soon as possible. However, the public is undecided on who to support. The opposition parties are so divided that there is no single party or coalition to effectively challenge Abe's LDP party.
This election is about whether we can trust Abe to continue running the government. But because we have no opposition to put our faith in, many people could end up voting for the LDP.
For Abe, to secure his position as prime minister, he needs to win over the hearts of the voters. An improved China-Japan relationship is an easy target, as these frosty ties can only improve after years of territorial and historical disputes. But it takes more than a single visit to warm things up.
So, how will Abe calling for an early election affect his mandate? And what about China-Japan relations? How is it likely to shape or help to shape his image in his own country? Let's turn to our panel to find out. In Beijing studio, long time no see, Gui Yongtao, Associate Professor at the Institute of International Relations at Peking University. We see 45th anniversary. Now it's the time for you to come to our show. But certainly occasion to celebrate. Thank you so much, sir. In Tokyo, we are joined by Yoichi Kato, Adjunct Fellow with the Japan Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Welcome. And finally, in London, we are joined by Kristin Surak, who's Associate Professor of Japanese Politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Welcome. I want to start with you, Mr. Kato. How should we understand, after a long time, Japanese Prime Minister Abe, even in the Chinese embassy, trying to celebrate the 45th anniversary? Is this a huge change, a wind in terms of Japan's agenda toward China?
Well, Abe has already, started his new approach to China over the last few months to improve the relationship with China. There are a number of reasons why he decided to improve the relationship with China, but his attendance of the reception last night at the celebration for China's Independence Day was a really visible evidence that he really wanted to improve the relationship. I think it was a really good move on the part of the Japanese government to do.
Well, you seem to cut short about the reasons that might be behind his eventual visit to the Chinese embassy on the 45th anniversary of the bilateral ties. So, Professor Gui, what about from your perspective? How do the Chinese see the reasons behind his apparent, quite warm, shall I say, attitude and gesture?
Well, I think that it is true that the Prime Minister of Japan has, for the past few months, gradually showed some positive attitude towards China and the Sino-Japanese relations. But more recently, we found that he had to, on the one hand, handle the scandals that has undermined the popularity of his administration. But on the other hand, also manage very difficult foreign policy issues, including Japan's relations with a Donald Trump-led United States and the mounting tensions over the Korean Peninsula. So it is necessary for the Prime Minister of Japan at this moment to show some positive signs and try to convince the voters in Japan that he can handle somewhat both domestic and foreign affairs. And I think that try to improve China-Japan relations might be something that he believes may worth doing.
Mr. Kato, can I ask you back? Do you think the voters really buy what has already been gestured by the Prime Minister? Really, his approval rating likely to go higher than it used to be, as he is showing a warmer attitude toward China?
Well, I think there are three reasons why Abe decided to take this change of approach to China at this moment on the eve of the general election. One is the rising tension with North Korea. And second is emergence of U.S. administration, which is unpredictable in terms of the Asia policy. And finally, there is a domestic necessity for both Abe and also, I think, China, Xi Jinping administration, to have a stable domestic political situation in order to go into the next term of the administration. So because of those three reasons, Abe, I think that Abe decided that it's a good timing for changing the course of the Chinese approach to China policy, and also convince the general public that he's ready to handle the relationship with China, just as the Professor Gui pointed out.
It takes two to tango. Well, the Japanese scholar is certainly suggesting that both China and Japan want exactly what's happening.
Yes, so I think this could provide some momentum for both sides to close the gaps between them and pragmatically handle the differences between them. I think that both sides are starting to considering some sort of summits in the coming months or next year. So I think that translating their warm attitudes into concrete actions in the coming months would be critical to improving the bilateral relations.
Well, we have seen, when we talk about challenge, there is at least a DPRK challenge, the nuclear issue. Certainly, China and Japan are both the countries against that, and therefore, with a common challenge over there, is it likely to help both countries come closer? That's a big question mark. It didn't happen before. Will it happen this time? What we look at right now is Abe's healthy poll numbers after DPRK firing missiles over the Japanese airspace. Take a look at this. DPRK, August 29th, September 15th, Hwasong, 12 missile tests that flew over Hokkaido give Abe a boost in the polls. By September 25th, Abe felt rather comfortable enough to call for an October 22nd snap election. So common challenge, will it help the two countries to come closer? Let's go to Ms. Surak for your analysis as a third party.
Well, certainly the North Korea issue has been very good for Abe's long-term plan of revising Article 9 of the Constitution, and indeed many other articles within the Constitution as well. I think the imminent threat that North Korea is playing into, in a sense, that increased concern of people in Japan about their own safety and what might happen next. And it does, for such a long time, people have been great supporters of Article 9, and that support has been gradually shifting, and now we might be at an inflection point where more people see it as necessary for Japan's self-defense, but it has a full-fledged army. So in that sense, North Korea is helping Abe in his long-term agenda.
Interesting. If that was the case, Mr. Gui, that put China into a very different corner. I mean, on the one hand, if you agree to further improve the ties with Japan, you probably, in a way, indicating certain kind of changes from the Japanese side, particularly regarding whether it wants to be a pacifist country, whether it wants to have a full-fledged army, is going to be acceptable to you or not. That's going to be one of the crucial issues between China and Japan.
Yes, exactly. I think that that one of the differences that still exists between these two countries. To take the North Korean issue as an example, China stresses and prioritizes peaceful dialogue as the final solution to this issue, while Japan has been so far pretty much vague in showing its position, implying that Japan could even accept or say yes to a, let's say, a military conflict over the scenario. That's also, of course, in a sense, justifies domestically the current administration's strengthening of its self-defense force, and in the future maybe amending its constitution. So I think that the agenda of these two countries seem to overlap to some extent, but on the particular approaches, there are still a gap between these two countries.
So actually, Mr. Kato, on the surface, there seem to be friendlier gestures from both sides, but when it comes to content, there seems to be an ever bigger divide about where Japan is and where Japan wants to go. Mr. Kato.
Well, I think it's a mutual shared interest to have a stable relationship between China and Japan, and also the stable strategic environment in the region. And I think that is what pushes Abe to pursue the improvement of the bilateral relationship.
Yeah.
And so I think this
but you think about it, Mr. Kato, stable relations based on what kind of foundation? I guess that is very crucial if you want to have a relatively long-term stable relationship. You have to agree on some of the fundamentals. And one of the fundamentals between China and Japan is disagreement. That is, what kind of Japan does Japan want, particularly the Abe administration, a more pacifist or actually a more military active Japan?
Well, I understand there are differences in strategic interests between Japan and China.
Right.
But the reality is right now that two countries face right now is to look for the common interest, to maximize the common interest rather than maximizing the difference. So I don't deny there are a number of the differences or the gaps in the national interest between those countries, but it's not a time to to dwell on that difference, but rather focus on the common interest, which is to have a stable strategic environment in the region, and focus on the domestic issues for both countries, both China and Japan.
Good to know, but still the fundamental has to be quite clear. Mr. Gui, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, when he was talking about the apparent warmer Japan-China relations, he said maybe the other party should consider not to take one step forward and then two steps back. That's exactly his quote. But the question is, without the agreement on the fundamentals, any unpredictability could happen at any moment.
Yes, we have seen, of course, in 2014, the two countries have agreed on four principled issues. So there's some, let's say, basic agreements between these two countries, but it's not enough to lead these bilateral relationships toward a long-term, sustainable, stable pattern of relationship. I think that economically, the two countries are the second and third largest economies in the world. They have a lot of common interests, and we found that a strong voice in Japan that believe that China's initiative, the One Belt and One Road, provide opportunities for the Japanese economy as well. And at the same time, the two countries has also to promote high-level, let's say, exchanges, including summits, to exchange, frankly, their views on strategic differences, so that they do not go into a strategic confrontation.
It's good to know that the three countries, China, South Korea, and also Japan, likely to have this trilateral summit very soon. But Ms. Surak, that's not likely to help us to solve the fundamental issues among these countries? You know very well, as a scholar in the region, about the history, about the future of Japan, about different strategies toward the DPRK nuclear issue, about the nature of relations with the United States vis-a-vis relations with the countries in the region. All these could be bombs that can explode at any time, Ms. Surak.
Well, I think it's very promising to have three-way talks on Japan, South Korea, and China, particularly around the issue of leaving out the U.S., given the volatility that we've seen coming out of the White House since Trump was elected president. I think looking at it, looking for regional solutions is probably much more productive than playing brinksmanship with tweets, really. But what is the, of course there's long-standing historical issues between the countries or among all three of them, but I think it's what we see now going forward is actually very promising being moves to something of greater regional harmonization on some key foreign policy issues. Of course, economic integration is already there.
Right.
To some degree, there is quite a lot of inter-country ties in the region already economically, but it would be very good to see a little bit more political cooperation, especially around very difficult foreign policy issues. Not that any of that is going to be easy going forward, but the fact that these countries are beginning dialogues in that direction, I think is very promising.
Dialogue at a time when the snap election is being called upon. That's an interesting timing, isn't it? Mr. Kato, how should we understand the political wing, in a way, the political power Prime Minister Abe are still having today vis-a-vis some of the major opponent of his, given the fact he has some kind of scandals earlier? Will his opponent have big power enough using international relations issue to battle him down?
Well, his major opposition or major challenger in this round of election is not the party which has an opinion to have a belligerent approach to China. Basically, I think Ms. Koike, who is a governor of Tokyo, who just formed a new party, and will probably pose the biggest challenge to Abe in this coming election, does not have any views that Japan should have a hostile approach to China. I think, but she is instead she has a rather realistic approach to China as well. So this coming election doesn't really push Abe to have a more hostile relationship approach to China.
Mr. Gui, do you agree with that? If that was the case, will this so-called goose gesture coming from Tokyo be only very temporary, but right before the election, and after that things likely to change overnight as well?
Well, I think that it will be difficult, of course, to change the overall atmosphere between Japan and China for only one election. But at least I do not see any further negative elements emerging at this moment when it concerns Japan's foreign policy. And I think that, as is pointed out, Ms. Koike, the governor of Tokyo, she is a populist, so she does not have a set ideology or political positions. She can swing one way or another. So, and for recent years, she concentrated mainly on local politics rather than national politics. So I think that at least can provide some window opportunity for the Japanese government to reconsider and recalibrate its foreign policy.
Ms. Surak, though, historically speaking, do you think the Japanese administration and the candidates, let's just say, talking about the election for the snap election in Japan, will be able to grasp that window opportunity? Are they going to really put on the agenda the relationship between China and Japan for their election politics? Will this so-called window opportunity really serve the two countries in the long term?
I think that's very difficult to say. Usually foreign policy issues like this don't come up. The LDP is currently calling it a poll on whether or not the sales tax should be increase. But I would like to disagree about the political orientation or the ideological orientation of Koike, because she's fairly conservative. In terms of her politics, she's definitely on the right, very similar to Abe, who's on the right. He's not center right on many things concerning nationalism and historical memory and these sorts of things as well. So where Koike differs is that she's supporting getting off of nuclear energy and in these sorts of things. But if she is able to mount a significant challenge against Abe and take 14 seats in the Diet, Abe will lose his 2/3 majority, which he needs to revise the Constitution. And what we'll see is basically two very conservative parties heading things off in Japan. And we have to say that if we think about the relationship to China, remembering that it was the DPJ, the Democratic Party of Japan, which has become the Democratic Party, which has now pretty much been dissolved, was one of the most pro-China parties to come to power. I mean, when they did come to power, they sent a major delegation to China. So I think that we also have to keep those dynamics in mind when we think about where things are going.
Where things are going is certainly very fluid. That's the only thing, at least, we could say at this point. And thank you so much for your analysis. Exactly, we are seeing some window opportunities, but it's really up to all sides to whether grasp it or not for the better. Gui Yongtao, Yoichi Kato, Kristin Surak, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us. You're watching World Insight with Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing.